one of the reasons the Battleground survey is typically paid attention to is that it's not a nationwide survey. It's just looking at the battlegrounds. It looks at 56 of the most competitive battlegrounds around the country and sees how things shape up there. What are the battlegrounds? Well, they get them from the Cook Political Index. Let me give you an idea of how they're shaping up right now. Let me just give you the battlegrounds for the Democrats. California 13, Illinois 17, Indiana 1, Kansas 3, Maine 2, Michigan 7, Michigan 8, Minnesota 2, New Hampshire 1, New Hampshire 2, Nevada 1, Nevada 3, Nevada 4, New York 3, New York 18, New York 19, Ohio 9, Ohio 13, Oregon 5, Pennsylvania 8, Pennsylvania 17, Rhode Island 2, Texas 28, Virginia 2, Virginia 7, Washington 8, and then on the Republican side, California 22, California 27, Colorado 8, Michigan 3, North Carolina 13, New Mexico 2, New York 22, Ohio 1. So you get a pretty broad spectrum across the country. But it's definitely the battlegrounds. It is parts of California. It is parts of Maine and lots of Michigan, lots of New Hampshire, lots of Nevada, lots of New York with the redistricting, Ohio and Pennsylvania and Virginia. Really swingy parts of the country. And it's not just any pollster who does it. It's the president's pollsters. Trump's pollster and Biden's pollster. Tony Fabrizio and John Azalone do the AARP Battleground survey. I'm shocked. So it came out yesterday and nobody's been talking about the Battleground survey. Nobody's talking about it. And I can only think it's because, well, most polls that come out do nationwide polling. They don't break it into swing districts. Swing districts tend to be a little more variable. But I suspect it's the results. In those 56 swing districts, 50% of voters approve of Trump and only 37% approve of Biden. I know. But wait, there's more. The Republicans hold a 4-point advantage, 46-42. By the way, the poll also found a gaping disconnect between the priorities of Democrat and Republican voters. Half of Republicans polled say the economy is their top issue. For Democrats, 26% say economic issues, abortions at 20, and voting rights at 13. Respondents rated Republicans as the party best equipped to deal with economic concerns, crime, and immigration. Democrats had an advantage on abortion, healthcare, and Social Security. By the way, this poll also shows Democrats losing ground with non-white voters, including Hispanic and Asian American voters. The poll found Democrats only hold a 3-point lead on the congressional ballot among Asian Americans and a 5-point lead among Hispanics over 50. Compare that to Brian Kemp down in Georgia has a 60% lead in Georgia with Hispanics over 50 and a 55% lead with Asian Americans. Nationwide, the Democrats barely have a lead. Now, individual Democrats could do well against weak Republican candidates. Republicans have some clunkers of candidates. That's part of the problem here. Democrats have poured some money in. In fact, we now know that Governor Pritzker in Illinois, the Democrat, gave $22 million to the Democratic Governors Association, which turned around and spent $19 million to prop up a terrible Republican candidate in Illinois who is now the Republican nominee. That's right, Republicans fell for it again. But y'all, I find this fascinating that there's not a ton of buzz here on the Battleground survey. And we know from the last several years that nationwide surveys have a bias towards the Democrats. Nationwide surveys have a bias towards the Democrats in the way they sample and the way they vet. And more and more people are saying it looks more and more like Democrats are more willing to talk to pollsters than Republicans. I, by the way, actually think that is true. I think that there is a bias in that Democrats are vastly more willing at this point to try to game the pollsters in ways Republicans are skeptical. They think it's the mainstream media calling. They don't want to talk to the media. They think they're a bunch of liars. There's clearly a bias towards Democrats in most polling. And in fact, overwhelmingly, pollsters will admit that that is the case. I mean, remember, a while back, the Democrats, after 2020, got the polling so wrong, particularly in congressional races, they were wondering what they could do to fix it. And the answer is, got nothing. We don't know. Sorry. If I were a Democrat, would be a little worried. There are some national polls out there right now that show the Republican generic ballot advantage collapsing. And the Democrats are out there saying, it's abortion, it's abortion, it's abortion. They're going to lose because of abortion. I don't think that's the case. Because remember, the generic ballot has undercounted Republican strength. With the exception of 2018, it greatly undercounted Republican strength. And it's true, Democrats have a grassroots fundraising advantage. Republican grassroots donors are not giving as much this time, but part of that is economic. Democratic grassroots operatives or donors tend to be wealthier than Republicans. The Republicans tend to be giving more to church and charity right now. The Democrats are it's a tithe among the Democrats now. Religious giving to the Democratic cause is part of it. You're seeing this, and I'm convinced that's what it is, by the way, because you have been seeing over the last number of years this growing trend of Democrats and Democratic supporters give money to politicians at a rate that exceeds the rate Republican small donors give. Meanwhile, Republican small donors are more likely to give to local charities and churches. I think it's becoming almost a religious obligation of the secular set to give money to political causes and candidates. And so you're going to keep seeing Democrats do that. Stacey Abrams down in Georgia has a massive spending advantage against Brian Kemp. A massive spending advantage. In fact, it's one of the things that gives a pause to Republicans in Georgia that Abrams has so much money. But here's the thing. Only 14% of Stacey Abrams' money has come from the state of Georgia. Only 14%. Stacey Abrams is overwhelmingly funded by people from California. And then New England, New York, and Delaware, and Massachusetts, and Connecticut exceed the amount of money she's gotten from Georgia. So Brian Kemp has raised $26.2 million down in Georgia from Georgians. Stacey Abrams has only raised $7 million from people in Georgia. Abrams has raised $10.2 million from California, $6.4 million from the District of Columbia, almost tied with Georgia. From New York and Delaware, Abrams has raised, $6.1 million. So New York and Delaware combined almost match what she's raised in Georgia. She's got unitemized donations of $6.7 million. She's got 6.4 from D.C., 10.2 from California. Now contrast that to Kemp. Now Abrams has raised $49.6. Kemp has raised 31.5, but $26.2 million of Kemp's money has come from Georgia. Now, why this matters? Well, their votes. Their votes. People from California, New York, Delaware, Florida, Connecticut, Massachusetts, District of Columbia, they can't vote for Stacey Abrams. The Georgians can, and there are far less people in Georgia supporting her. You should know the Cook Political Index this morning has moved Georgia into the lean Republican camp. The growing consensus is that Kemp wins re-election among the party and outside objective prognosticators of politics. They're thinking Kemp wins. When you have a generic ballot question in the 56 swingiest districts in the country, and they're all going Republican. And they've got, most importantly, Donald Trump at a 50% approval rating in the 56 swingiest districts in the country. The Democrats have all sorts of problems. The January 6th stuff has soaked in to the Democrats and the media. They really think they've damaged Donald Trump. They should pay attention to the fact that 56% or 50% of voters in the swingiest 56 districts in the country, they like Trump more than they like Biden. The January 6th stuff has not helped as much as they would like to think, and the gap between Democrats and Republicans continue to narrow. I saw Ron Brownstein. Ron Brownstein is somebody who is essentially, he's been a political observer at the Los Angeles Times and CNN for a long time. He's definitely a liberal, definitely a progressive, and he definitely has one of the people who over years has said, well, demography is destiny. The GOP is a shrinking coalition of white voters. And he's pushing back on the idea that there's a Hispanic movement to the GOP. He thinks it's basically a temporary economic thing. I don't think so. Now, his whole shtick has been demography's destiny, the days of the GOP comes to an end. But this has been going on now since 2016, 2018, 2020, and headed into 2022. We're seeing Hispanic voters, more and more of them moving to the right as the parties realign. And I don't know if he's so far invested into the Democratic Party, he can't see it. But when you've got the Battleground survey of 1,200 likely voters, in the 56 U.S. House districts that the Cook Political Report rates as leans or toss-up, with a margin of error of 2.8%. And it finds the Republicans with a 4-point generic ballot advantage, Joe Biden with a 36% approval rating, and Donald Trump with the 50% approval rating. And the pollsters are Presidents Trump and Biden's pollsters together, working together to get the data. The Democrats, there should be alarm bells going off in Washington. And I suspect the fact that few people are talking about the Battleground survey is the alarm bell going off. They would prefer not to make eye contact with it. Fascinating stuff. Also, another data point that doom is coming.